Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here. This, of course, is the topic this week is one dear to my heart. And I want to start by telling you about an interesting thing that happened not long ago. Doug and I found this beautiful spot in the forest near our home, and it was where three huge ponderosa trees, however that goes, had created sort of a sacred space at the base of it. You could feel the energy when you stepped into it, and that's where we decided to get married. So we had 6 little log stumps for the 6 little bodies that were going to sit on them, and we carefully prepared a ritual to honor the land and all those who had been there before us, and to honor all that would follow from that day on. The day before the wedding, I went to the space with a friend. I guess I wanted to sit quietly and feel into the spot and make sure I could be really present the next day, instead of my world-famous leaving my body. Oh, did we get married? I missed it. On a whim, I took my ukulele, and for a while there we sat in this pretty clearing in the woods, and then I just started to play the uke and sing, and then we noticed there was a small herd of deer about 30 feet away from us. I'm not sure how far, no further than that door from where I am now, and they just stood there and stared. And they weren't frozen, and they weren't wary, they just were standing there looking at us. It was one of those magical days where the music just came, and I was finding little patterns and notes and things on the uke that pleased me anyway, and so I played and I sang, and the deer continued to stare at us, and nobody wanted to move because we didn't want to break the spell. It was like this little magic pocket we were all in. Anyway, about after half an hour or so, the energy just shifted, the music just stopped, and the deer wandered off, and my friend and I just sat there like, wow, for quite a while longer. It was a mystical experience, and not because the deer were so close and all that, although that was really cool, but because of the sense of presence that held the event. It was deep. We were deeply moved by it, and the feeling that we had stumbled on this well of mystery, like a precious divine moment had been impressed upon us, and the deer too. I often wondered what they thought about it. It's our nature to want to have special things happen, and to feel special, and then to want to share our story about that special happening. We're elevated, we feel lifted out of our day-to-day, and the idea that we could actually live in that state of that special happening seems impossible. And yet what the mystics have told us again and again is that it is possible, and it's simple, although it might not actually be easy. Mystics are those who appear to have some connection with the truth of existence that the rest of us don't. But the real truth is they have a conscious connection with who and whose they are, that everyone can, but often don't. Maybe mystics come wired in a way that just allows them to tune in and stay tuned in, while the rest of the world needs to learn how to be a receiver. But our godhood is not dependent on knowing this or on believing this. Only our experience is. The Sufi poet Rumi said, "Live in the nowhere that you came from, even though you have an address here." Some of you may recall this story. I'll try to keep it brief. I was in Costa Rica, and it was a time when my life had been turned upside down, and I was doing a lot of praying and logging a lot of miles on the coastline. And early one rainy morning, as I sloshed my way down the beach, I blurted out in my somewhat pathetic misery, please, God, let me see through your eyes for just a minute. And this voice immediately said, you know that's not how it works. But I was actually feeling desperate, and I said, I know, but even so, just for a moment, and for just a moment, I found myself where there was neither time nor space. It wasn't light or dark, or it wasn't hot or cold. It was nothingness, except that the word nothingness has a meaning to us, so we can't use the word nothing without conjuring a something, and there was no something. It was a step out of time. I was the air, and the air was me. I felt fully expanded, but there was no emotion. There was just nothing. And then the world, as I knew it, sort of hove back into view, and the voice said, I need your eyes to see. Oh, yeah, that. You know, we're taught this, we learn it, it's part of the law. As I looked around, I could still see it was quite a misty morning, and the ocean, there was no horizon line because the ocean just sort of blended into the fog. And at first I was a little bit freaked out. I mean, this was like a wowie wow moment. But at the same time, I thought, well, if that's what it's like to be formless, then being alive on Earth is a pretty good deal. I mean, it was way funner, even in my misery. And maybe that was the point. I realized later that the whole thing was an allegory, but it brought me a direct experience of the abyss. And later I would try to recreate the experience of it in my mind, but then I thought, if I do that, perhaps I am not expanding into the present. In The Naked Now, it's a book by Richard Rohr. I gotta get rid of this. I'm sliding around all over the place here. He speaks of presence. When we put down judgment and past and future and open our hearts and minds to the full potential of the moment, then we may begin to experience something beyond those limits we've created for ourselves. And these moments of contemplation and prayer, these are the moments that nurture our conscious contact with the divine essence within. And as we learn to carry this prayerful state into our daily lives, we will have these transcendental moments, these illuminations where we feel we're one with every atom and we have an enlivened sense of being, where we are feeling the I am. As you conjure this state, you gaze upon the world around you, and it appears surreal, like you're watching a movie being acted around you, and you don't feel like you're part of the movie, but you are in the movie, and you're still completely aware that it is a movie. And in this place, there's no judgment. Oh, that movie really sucks. Or, wow, that was such a great movie. Did you see that? There's no concern with the storyline, with what's going to happen or what has happened. The content is unimportant because you're bathed in this beatific nature of the feeling of being I am. Now, the mystics have told us again and again, whether in spiritual discourse or poetry or enlightened lecture, that we are divine beings. Holmes, Mills, Emerson, Whitman, Hafiz, Rumi, Jesus, Buddha. I mean, it's a long, long list, isn't it? They've all spoken of the dance of ecstasy with the divine. And the paradox is one of appearing to be saltwater protoplasm and slime in a fragile mortal body, and yet knowing we are eternal beings, having full expression on the manifest plane. So this appearance of duality is really hard for the mind to grasp, and yet for each of us, I think there's a something, there's a statement or a thought or a book or an image, a sound, someplace in the world, a certain person that unlocks the door to this magical, mystical adventure. And in this place, we feel enlivened and enlightened, and we know who and whose we are, and all the veils of pretense are dropped, and we don the garment of knowing. There's no dancing around, we just know. For each of us, there's a magic key that unlocks the mystery, even if it's just for a moment. But once you've had that moment, you can't go back. You cannot unknow it. That's the key. The sense of our own Christed nature is that feeling of being I am. And trying to understand God through the mind is a vain and futile act. What's that, like those Star Trek Borg people? Resistance is futile. The other day I was teaching art to my kidlings at, there's a Catholic elementary school in Alamogordo. I teach once a week. And I was looking at something and I said, "Oh my God, that's really beautiful." And one of the children said, "Do not use the name of the Lord in vain." It set me back for a second. And usually this is said when somebody uses the name of the Lord when they're cursing. But that's not even the history of the caution. The name of God was considered unsayable. It was never said aloud. In some of the earliest teachings, it was considered impossible to correctly name this thing of such greatness and enormity that it could be neither understood nor expressed in a word. And while I was researching this, I had an interesting awareness, because I've always done a little dance with the word God. It's part of my vernacular now. I've adopted the word. I use it. And it's not like I don't have a relationship with this aspect of my being. It's just never settled completely for me. So maybe on some level I understood this conundrum, the naming of the unnameable. And then the thought popped in, how often do we force ourselves to conform only to discover later that our original instincts were good? In some teachings, the closest that one could come to naming God was through the sound of their breath. Therefore, the names for God were an attempt to vocalize in word the sound of breathing. Do that, feel that. God, Yahweh, Jehovah, Vav, You can feel all of those sounds in your heart. And in this place, God isn't a word or a name. Just think of the sound of breathing as the name of the one altogether lovely, so that every second of our lives, we're breathing God as it is breathing us. Eight centuries ago, Hildegard of Bingen defined prayer as breathing in and breathing out the one breath of the universe. The sound shows up in Sanskrit and mantras and represents infinite consciousness. It's one of the seed syllables, along with, there's tons of them, but I'm, om, ai, all seed syllables. But if Sanskrit isn't your thing, and it isn't for some people, crazy, but it's true, you can find it in English. In fact, here's a little mantra I think you may even say already when you get home from work. I'm home. I've arrived. They're all in there. Just throw a little intention at it. You got yourself a mantra. I'm home. I've arrived. These ancient sounds find their way into our language. And it's helpful to have in our spiritual toolkit mantras and ideas that realign us, that remind us, And one of the beauties I found is called Prayers of the Cosmos by Neil Douglas Klotz. He's a scholar of the Aramaic language, and in this book, amongst other things, he translates the Lord's Prayer directly from the writings of Jesus. Now, Aramaic was a multi-dimensional language. Each word had a literal, a metaphysical, and a metaphorical meaning. And the language was designed, those three elements were intertwined to give depth to the language of the heart, which was really the first language. So, in this book, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, actually translates as, O birther, father, mother of the cosmos, the breathing life of all, creator of the shimmering sound that touches us. We hear you breathing in and out, in silence, and in the roar and the whisper. We hear your name. Help us breathe one holy breath, feeling only you. This creates a shrine inside. Your name, your sound can move us if we tune our hearts as instruments for its tone. Hear the one sound that created all others. In this way, your name is hallowed in silence. How does that language make you feel? How does language make us feel? It's human habit to regurgitate stories of our earthly lives, and whether they're stories of happiness or tragedy, we have to understand that those stories bring up a vast well of feelings, and those feelings have another vast well of feelings out in the world to attach to, and so they're magnified, and consequently, we tell our stories and we feel this huge sensorial thing when we talk about them. We feel it in our bodies. We feel big when we tell our stories. But when we have a mystical experience, like hearing the voice of God or conversations with dead people, we're filled with this extraordinary love and expansiveness, but we tend to be embarrassed. Oh, well, I thought it was probably, never mind. Those feelings of rapture, of ecstatic love, have been over the centuries associated with things that should be hidden. Private passion or too much exuberance. Simmer down. That was a common phrase when I was growing up. Simmer down. When what I was feeling was abundant joy over some pretty insect or a butterfly, or maybe I felt magic in the air, I don't know. And it's not like my family was puritanical or particularly conservative. They were just suffering from generational beliefs about keeping a lid on things. It wasn't considered appropriate to shout untethered joy from the rooftops. I really want to do it. I've spoken before about retraining the mind, spiritual practices to clear away clutter and make room for authentic being. I think we experience God as a feeling. And what we're really doing is learning to get the mind out of the way so we can experience the feeling of being, I am. And experience it often enough that we begin to embody it at a cellular level. And that's what a lot of these mantra and sound practices are for. They help us learn to embody this feeling at a cellular level. Holmes talks about the love and the law, and we spend a lot of time learning about the law, but mysticism is about the love. The wild, ecstatic love affair we have with God, the one we hide in our day-to-day lives, but which mystics have shouted from the rooftops, and we should too. How do we stand in pious proclamation of our faith in God and yet allow none of our passion to leak out? Shh, someone might see you. Simmer down. Hafiz, another Sufi poet, said, "Write 1,000 luminous secrets upon the wall of existence so that even a blind man will know where we are and join us in this love." Let's all get luminous paint pens and run around Las Cruces. Wouldn't that be cool if anybody went out in the dark, they'd just see love, 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 love all over the place. Imagine in a blackout. That'd be really cool. I remember as a little girl, I used to walk around our land, and I'd wade through the tall grass in the fields until I got to the forest. And I was a little bit nervous because I was a really little girl, but there was this sense of mystery and a little sense of adventure, something that I couldn't see with my eyes, but I could feel it. And I remember just inside the forest was a spot where trees, probably 100 years before, had fallen over and created this little square. And then the whole thing over the years, over the decades, had gotten covered with moss, and it made this little green nest. And I was absolutely convinced that that's where fairies danced or some other mystical thing. And I kept going there, and sometimes I'd just sit in the nest, and I'd hoping I would see something. And maybe what I was experiencing were the energy trails left by things that had already occurred, but maybe I was communing with God. Either way, no one believed me. But why is it that we are trained out of awe and wonder? Why are we taught not to see the mystery and the mastery in the world around us? This is our chance to experience everything, anything. And instead, we slowly and steadily turn it into some sort of Luddite version of being human, all our physical senses pushed to the mat. That's all we can do, to be still and to feel. And there's all these things that we've done to try and make the world feel like more. But we've already got it. It's already here inside of us. And all we have to do is open our hearts and our minds to the idea that we are mystical beings and we live in a mystical universe. And in that place, anything could happen. And with childlike wonder, step into the day and say, what will today be about? And what can I expand into the universe as a blessing? We live in the experiential plane, and we have become so bonded with the material world, we want to see proof. Don't we? I thought mystical stuff could happen, but show me some. So like the last Sunday that I was here, I'm driving down the highway and I'm thinking about this talk, and I'm thinking, yeah, I'm feeling all steeped in the mystery, so why can't I see a spaceship hiding behind that bush? Or why don't I just blink myself home? A mentality stuck, I think, somewhere between Jesus and Kreskin. In The Naked Now, the book I referred to, Richard Rohr talks about third eye seeing. First eye accounts for, I think he said, about 80% of the population. And it's just looking simply at what one can see, feel, touch, enjoying it well enough, not giving it any particular thought, with little interest in larger ideas. Second eye seeing utilizes first eye, of course, you're still seeing, but it also uses knowledge, imagination, intuition, and reason to sort of augment the experience. Whereas third eye seeing enjoys all of that, but moves into the deeper experience, seeing with wonder the underlying mystery, with a sense of spaciousness, a sense of connection with all. The mystical gaze builds upon the first two eyes and then goes further. This is how the mystics see. They've moved from mere belief systems into actual inner experience. And all spiritual traditions agree this is possible, desirable, and available to everyone. From John 10:37, even though you do not believe me, believe the miracles, that you may know and understand the Father is in me and I in the Father. The Father. Rohr goes on to say that a challenge in the world today is that many leaders in the churches, political leaders, et cetera, have not had the 3 eyes experience, and so they cannot lead where they themselves have not gone. I think it's an important contemplation. Mystics invite us to contemplate, to remain open, to practice presence, to see with the 3rd eye sight. Without this skill, we are trying to love God with a very small vision, a divided heart. And as Rohr says, it's like trying to view the entire universe with a $5 pair of binoculars. The mystical is a feeling experience. When you feel that lightness of being, where the boundaries of skin appear to disappear, and you feel yourself expand outward, those are some of the markers. Those are some of the indicators that you are a wonder. And sometimes, in the busyness of life in the material world, we let those moments go by so we can get back to the business of being busy. So carve out some time to allow wonder and awe, to allow yourselves to be bathed and steeped like a good tea in the miracle and the mystery. Shakespeare said, supposedly, "There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy." Well, what if you allow the dream to dream you? Magical and mystical adventure lies waiting in the wings to go on stage. All the words are written, all the actors dreaming, waiting to turn the page. The time is now. How much joy can you be filled with in a lifetime? How much happiness are you allowed to have? You're the actor and the play. You know the show must go on no matter what you believe. Make your choice, the time is now. Step into the spotlight, open up your heart. All the world is waiting to see the greatest part you'll ever play. The time is now. Time is now. Step into the spotlight. Open up your heart. All the world is waiting to see the biggest part you'll ever play. The time is now. The time is now. A magical and and mystical adventure lies waiting in the wings to go on stage. A magical and mystical adventure lies waiting